it's hard to know what you want when you don't have any experience. And so this is why I tell people the best way to figure out what you want to do is to figure out what you don't want to do. Right? So you can't make a bad move. Just start taking classes. If you don't like, the engineering side and gravitate more to the visualization, that's fine. Continue with that. But just start, because you're not going to do enough analysis to be able to make that perfect decision.
Hey nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we get to talk to amazing data professionals and ask them all about how they're using data to solve the world's problems. We're highlighting all of the skills that data professionals use on their daily basis. And we're also including fun bits, of course, because we're all nerds here and we love to have fun. So with us today, we have Sadie St. Lawrence. How are you doing today, Sadie?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's so fun to be here. I was just commenting before the show how much I love all your brand style, and I love that you just embrace like your inner nerd. I don't know if people are listening or watching the show, but I definitely wore my fun nerdy outfit today just for the show, because I was like, you know what, this is where you can let your nerd flag fly. And so I'm like, I'm gonna do it, and I'm so excited to be here with the fellow data nerds.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your nerdiness with us on the show.
My pleasure.
We typically start off our show by understanding people's origin stories. Nerds, we like comic books, origin stories. We like to understand people's backgrounds and how you got to where you are today in your career.
Yeah, so I was a super nerd because I was homeschooled. So the influence of other people, I definitely grew up living in my own world. Thankfully, I had 6 siblings who, as you read more, siblings do a lot of the scaffolding of us and shaping who we are and our beliefs and all of those things. But yes, I grew up homeschooled. And so I knew that I wanted to go to university, but I didn't have an academic record. And so thankfully, I had a lot of time being homeschooled and played the piano way too much and became very good at it. And so I was able to get a scholarship for piano performance. So that is the first degree I have, is a piano performance degree. And when I went into university, I just fell in love with all the general ed classes. And being in general ed, I got so exposed to the sciences that I fell in love with the scientific method. And that's what led me into getting a degree then in psychology as well. So I read the book Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks. I would highly recommend any of Oliver Sacks' books. He is a famous neurologist who unfortunately has passed away, but he writes about all the weird things our brains do. And so if you like that kind of stuff, which I feel like this audience would, definitely check him out. But yes, I read his book Musicophilia, and I was like, okay, this is a bridge. Like, I can go from music to music and the brain. And so that's why I switched to psychology. And once I was done with my bachelor's degree, I started working in a neuroscience lab and really thought that I was going to go be a PhD neuroscientist. I was studying emotional learning and memory, and I loved the experiments and everything that I was doing. However, after one afternoon, on a Friday afternoon, actually working in the lab, I had to euthanize the rodents that I was working with because I was done with the experiments, and it's time to take out their brains and dice those up and all the fun things that you would do in the lab. And I had this moment where I caught eyes with the rodent right before I had to euthanize it. And the rodent and I had like this connection where I was just like, what am I doing? Right? Like, I love science, I love analysis, but like, I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. So I went home that weekend and just went through an exercise that I still use today. It's taking a piece of paper on a 1/2 right. What parts of my job do I like, and what parts of my job do I not like? And so I try and then look for a job where I can keep all the parts I like, but get rid of the parts that I don't like. And so that led me to doing some searching on Google, and I came across the term data science. And once I came across that term in 2014, I was just immediately hooked. It was like this new field that they, from what I read, it was like the rebels of academia were leaving it. And I was like, yes, I want to be a rebel of academia. And so that Monday, I quit my job at the lab and was like, I just need any job working with data. I got a job as a research analyst. I started taking classes on Coursera. I then went on to get my master's degree. And that really was the beginning, was just the first job as a research analyst, which later led me to become an analytics engineer, a data scientist, lead data science teams, then become an AI strategy consultant, and then now the role I'm in today, which is the founder of Women in Data.
That sounds like a wonderful journey. What stood out to me was kind of like your ability to tie in each of your experiences to the other. So there wasn't like any time where you were actually like starting out at ground zero. It was like, oh, music actually ties into psychology, which then ties into science, which then ties into data science. So that's an amazing like skill to have when you can tie all of your journeys together.
Yeah, I see so many individuals who are what I call career changers, right? So you did one thing and you want to switch, which seems to be like totally different, particularly in the data space, right? So many people come into it from a different background, which is fantastic. And unfortunately, what I see from a lot of individuals is they throw out all their previous skills and it's like, no, 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 no. Like that's your greatest asset. It's what is your past experience. It's what makes you unique. And also you're already probably have about half the skills you need if you sit down and write out your skills, not your job title. And I think that's really the key, is to dive a little bit deeper into what you're doing and find what is that bridge, right? Even if it's just as simple as like, everyone uses communication in their job, right? So if you have a communication skill, which we all do, if we've worked, like that's your starting point. We all have something to start from, but it's also our biggest asset. So I just tell people like, please, please, please don't throw out all your skills. That's an asset, not a disadvantage.
Exactly. That's what I like to share too. I call them transferable skills.
Yes, I love that.
So, what are you doing now? Like, what types of data problems do you like to solve the most?
So for me, one of my favorite things to do is I guess it's kind of a hobby too. It's something that I call brain surfing. And so it's where when the sun's out in California, which it's cold and rainy now, I love to go out in my sunbed, and I'll take my iPad, I'll take like lots of pieces of paper and pens, and I'll just like sit there and think and draw and write and research things and kind of just let my brain flow in this free creative thought. And so my favorite thing to do is like find connections between obscure industries or obscure topics, but most importantly to like design new ways of thinking or new AI systems. So I really fell in love with the strategy side of things, particularly because after working in the field for so long, I saw so many projects just fail because the requirements weren't fully defined. The business didn't know what they wanted, or the technical teams didn't know how to talk to the business. And so I really love to be that bridge between both sides. I find business really fascinating. I love to learn about how businesses work, the financials, but then I also love to look at technology and particularly AI as a tool to say, okay, now that I've, really deconstructed, and maybe I'm pulling from my lab days here, right? I've dissected the business. Now I can see where AI can come in and potentially make things more efficient or add on to the process. And so for me, my favorite work is really taking a business and designing that AI strategy for them.
That's awesome. So I feel like all of what you have for us today to share are going to be considered fun bits. So we'll officially like kind of transition into our fun bits at this time, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of focus more on, to start off with, the projects that you're working on that really highlight the soft skills that you've carried with you throughout your career.
Yeah. So particularly with working with different clients. So I also have another business, SSL Innovations. And so we do AI consulting for different clients. And so much of any technical work is that communication side of things. And where I really pull from is my work in piano performance, particularly because one of the things that I learned in piano performance was when you're playing a piece, you're often taking people on a journey. And so you have to get them to understand and see and feel what you're experiencing as the artist of playing something. And I think that really applies a lot to the technical work that we do. It's so much of helping the client that you're working with really understand the capabilities of the technology, where it's a good fit, where it isn't a good fit. But most importantly, it really takes a lot of empathy and compassion to the client to go into their world. Because so often I personally have failed and have seen others fail when we're like, this is what we know, and we're trying to bring our solution and fit like a round peg into a square hole, right? And it doesn't always really, it doesn't ever work, right? And so having those soft skills to be curious about who you're working with, your client, your business, but still in the background, you always have your knowledge of technology, right? So I look at what I've learned in AI as like this library. When I'm talking to somebody, I can go and refer to any of the models needed, right? Whether it's an unsupervised model and we're using k-means, whether it's a supervised and just a simple classification algorithm, right? That library always exists and I can pull from that anytime. But what's more important is for me to really understand where are they today and what is it that they're really trying to do and what is their why. And if I can get to that, I can always then pull and find that right solution. And so I have to first understand, is it a square hole? Is it a round hole, right? Is it a triangle? Is it a hexagram, right? So whatever that is, make sure that I pull the right solution to that problem.
Mm-hmm. I saw one of your posts, you mentioned the fact that there's such slow progress in the tech field. And I think it's because a lot of it is trying to find what shape the holes are in that way you're working correctly. And you said that like if you knew this beforehand, it might have influenced you to go into a different field. So what would have that field been? Would it have been music?
I don't know what the other field would have been. I mean, I personally really love physics, and so like there's still a part of me that wants to go back and get like a physics degree, and like that will probably happen sometime. But yeah, I think, there's a big misperception between what everybody is talking about in the industry and what's actually happening in businesses. And I think that is also really a wake-up call for individuals who are looking to get into the space. One, individuals tend to have a lot of imposter syndrome and don't know if they're good enough. And or if they don't have that, they think they're going to come in and just be shipping these amazing AI models left and right. And unfortunately, that's not always the reality of it, right? There's a lot of back and forth to get clear on what is the priority and how do we get funding for this project and how do we make sure that communication stays consistent between the teams. And maybe the technical team has built an amazing model, but now you don't have a relationship with the marketing team to actually put it into Salesforce or put it into some marketing tool where it can actually be productive. And so there's all these additional nuance areas of it. And I think what was surprising to me as I started to do some reflection, I thought about when I entered the field 10 years ago and just like how excited I was. It was like, data science and analytics and AI is going to change the world and we're going to do all these amazing things. And then as I look up 10 years later, the same problems that we were struggling with back then are the same problems that we're struggling with today. And so I started to just kind of sit back and go, why do we still have these same problems, right? We have made advancements in computing. We've made advancements in the tooling. Right? We've obviously made amazing advancements in the world of AI and how we train our models and what they produce. But why do we see companies still struggling to use data, struggling to implement it in their business, and still struggling to know where AI fits into their overall strategy? And that's really what led me to this reflection of like, I'm glad somebody didn't tell me that would be the case, because then I may not have entered it, right? It's like they always say hindsight's 2020, but some hindsight you don't want, right? Because if you're like, hey, you're going to be dealing with the same problems for 10 years, it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. So it's like probably a better thing that I didn't know that, but also leads me to question of like, why do we not see progress happen as much? And I really loved all the comments on the post. A lot of what people came to, and I think is very accurate, is it's not so much about the technology, but it's about people. And this is where, we hear the term people process technology. It's like the tried and true triangle of anything that you want to do in technology and business. But it's that people aspect. And particularly, we're at an inflection point where, because of compounding interest, technology can grow and evolve at a much faster rate than we as humans can. And so now there's starting to be this gap between how fast technology is evolving versus how fast humans are evolving. And so that is why I think we see this gap in terms of like the buzz of what's happening in the space and the capabilities versus the reality of where most businesses are at and being able to make it practical and be able to make it useful.
Mm-hmm. So with the progression and how data and AI has, evolved, what makes me think, because this is still early mid-January, right? Everyone comes out with these like how to break into data in 2024, how to break into AI in 2024. And they're all really great conversations, and I resonate with all of them. But what makes me think about it is like, would this advice still be true a decade ago when there was still data and there was still AI? It was just a different realm.
Yeah, it definitely is a very different environment. So, particularly, I can give you an example that I think demonstrates it well, which is when I decided to get my master's degree in the field, there were 5 universities offering a master's degree in data science. Right? So, when people say, Sadie, how did you pick? I'm like, well, there were 5 to even look at. Now there's, just in the US alone, right? There's hundreds. You can't even look at all of them and compare them. You have to kind of pick your favorite brand names and then go from there. And so that, I think, just describes the difference of it so well, let alone on Coursera. There were two like data science kind of classes and modules, right? There was one from John Hopkins University. That was like the OG one. It was like a 5 module thing. And then there was the one from Andrew Ng, which was his one like intro to machine learning class, right? That was it, right? Along with maybe like some blog posts, a few Kaggle. There weren't notebooks out. Jupyter Notebooks was not a thing yet. And so there wasn't as much noise. And I think that's what makes it really difficult for people to break into the field today, is there is so much noise. And so we get into this analysis paralysis of like, where do I even go to learn? Do I do MOOCs? Do I do boot camps? Do I do a master's degree? If I narrow even it down to one of those, which master's degree, which MOOC, which boot camp, right? Let alone the field of jobs has grown. So when I started, data science was supposed to be what is today now 5 different jobs, right? Data scientists were supposed to be the data engineers. They were supposed to be the data visualization experts. They were supposed to be that almost business analyst to communicate with the business, the data product manager, right? And I think it's fantastic that data science has become like its whole job family, but it just shows also the difference of like, before you just pick data science because it encapsulated everything. But now, how do you know if you want to be a data engineer versus a data product manager versus an ML ops individual, right? It's expanded so much. And so I think that's the difference, is it's a much noisier space than it was before.
Absolutely. Completely agree. When I was in college, there wasn't anything related to data science. Within, I think, my second year as an adult job career person, I just stumbled upon data. And I was like, oh, what is this? What does this mean? And that's kind of how I broke into data, was just accidentally finding out about it and being curious and, asking my manager to be put on more of those related projects. So definitely a different space. And I was going to ask you, does that make it harder or easier for folks in 2024? And I think you said it perfectly. It does make it a little bit harder because there's so many choices.
Yes, I think it makes it a lot harder, particularly because it's hard to know what you want when you don't have any experience. And so this is why I tell people the best way to figure out what you want to do is to figure out what you don't want to do. Right? So you can't make a bad move. Just start taking classes. If you don't like, the engineering side and gravitate more to the visualization, that's fine. Continue with that. But just start, because you're not going to do enough analysis to be able to make that perfect decision.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So with all of these different choices, opportunities available out there to break into the field that you're most interested in, what would your biggest advice be as to how to learn these new things?
Yeah, so I have what I call like my success formula for breaking into tech, and it's pretty simple. It is learn, do, share, repeat. And so the reason that I tell people to do this is I often see individuals get stuck in one of those phases, particularly the learning phases. And so it's like, okay, well, I gotta take this one more class, or I gotta take this one more class. The truth is, when you apply, particularly with a resume, nobody knows how much you actually know. It's one, we could get into why that's such a bad way to like hire people, but nobody can actually tell from your resume how much you know. And so the best way is to get that experience doing it, right? And so people often ask me, well, like, how do I get experience doing it when I don't have a job yet? Joining hackathons, datathons, Kaggle competitions, working on your own portfolio projects. Really, it doesn't even have to be portfolio, just projects that interest you. So when I was building my SQL for data science class, I needed to build a database, and I was like, this is boring to just build any database. I want to build something fun. And so I classified all the clothes in my closet and built a database about, the clothes and shoes of persons and things that I had, because I thought I'll come up with interesting questions because that data is interesting to me, right? So what I would say is just find fun projects to do with data, and that's the doing phase. And then be sure to share what you are doing, right? So it's, if you want to build a brand for yourself or get speaking opportunities, people have to know what you talk about, right? And they typically, again, just from like a LinkedIn profile, know much about you. It's kind of like a resume. But if they see your posts and see what you're talking about, then it gives them a better idea of like, oh, this person looks interesting to talk to. It's also a great way to stand out in front of recruiters or hiring managers. So make sure you do the process of sharing, because it helps build that network. And then the reason I say the repeat is because this should be a really quick cycle that you work through. You shouldn't be in the learn phase for 6 months, the do phase for 6 months, the share phase for 6 months, right? You should be on a monthly basis at least, right? You're learning, doing, sharing, repeat, right? And just continuing cycling through this. It's like that. There's so many different great visualizations and graphics, but that where it's just a slow upward mobility, right? It can seem like you're going back and forth, but really you're making an upward mobility over time. So that's kind of my best advice for individuals, but particularly because if you go through that process, you'll get more feedback into the model of yourself in terms of what you actually enjoy learning, doing, sharing, and what you enjoy, you will then repeat.
Yeah. I like that template.
Yeah. I love breaking things down into like typically threes is my perfect number, but sometimes four sneaks in.
Okay. So I'm a huge fan of networking. I love to meet new people, chat with different individuals, understand, the fun things that they're interested in. I know you're a fan of networking as well, and I think that you have some really good recommendations on how to network without being boring. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, so when I first started my career, everybody tells you build your network, build your network. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to build my network. I thought it was dumb. I hated going to networking events. It felt so awkward. It felt transactional. And then someone once explained to me the idea of social capital and gave me a new idea of how to embrace networking, which is just work on and approach it as building friendship. And to me, that felt so much more approachable. Like, okay, I'm going to go to this event to see if I can make a friend, right? Instead of like going to this event to make some business connection that hopefully they'll help me get a job or I can sell them business. Like, yuck, that just does not feel good to me, right? And the truth is, no, it doesn't feel good to anyone. None of us want to go to an event where it feels like a transaction. We want to do something where it feels like we're building real bonds and connections. So the way that I've built really strong bonds and connections with people is either A, to work on projects with them. Like you will have a bond forever when you've like been in the trenches with somebody, like maybe you did a hackathon or a datathon together, or you worked on your team together on like a side project that you really get to know somebody and will build a deep connection. The other side of things that just like a smaller portion is just commenting on people's posts and having people comment on yours and replying back and forth of saying positive and nice things, right? Again, back to that idea of like building friendships. How do you do that, right? You come in, you're like, oh, I really love, your sweatshirt. It makes me happy to see. I don't know, are those like kitties? I don't know what they are, but they're making
They're little
me
kitty
excited.
sushis.
Yes, it's so cute. Right? And be genuine about the things that you're commenting on and saying. But those are the things that people will remember. I love the saying that people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel. And so if you can approach networking from that mindset, you will be extremely successful. But more importantly, you'll have a really meaningful life because you'll have these deep, meaningful connections, which I think is what we're all really looking for.
I agree. Yeah. What about when you're at a networking event? Because I know, at least for me, being an introvert, being, one-on-one with that person, it can feel a little bit more awkward. How do you get over that?
I start to realize everyone feels awkward. So that helped me a lot. I was always afraid. You see at like a networking event, there's 2, 3 people kind of chatty, right? I was always afraid to just go in and like, hi, I'm Sadie. And finally I started to do it. And I was like, oh, this isn't bad. Like I've never had a terrible experience. Everyone's never looked at me like, get out of our circle, right? You can really tell if like the vibe was off of like, that's a conversation I don't need to enter, right? But typically, if people are chatting casually, if you just walk up and introduce yourself, the group usually welcomes you quite easily. And then for me, it's a matter of like, how do I start to find better questions to ask people versus what do you do? Right, again, back to building meaningful connections. So one of the things that's helped with me a lot with that is actually podcasting. I love podcasting just because it helps you to ask questions that are richer and deeper and get people talking. So some of the questions I love are, what's bringing you joy these days? Or a good starter is like, what brought you to this event? Right, it's to get their background of like how they hear about it. It can open up a lot of things. Another great option is like, what are some fun projects that you're working on these days? And so anything besides the common question of what do you do, I think is a good starting point.
Yeah, I like that.
And typically that's what people want to answer as well, right? They're tired of talking about what they do. They want to talk about something fun they're working on or a fun hobby or like a place they've recently traveled. So again, approaching it from a friendship and a connection standpoint is going to make all the difference.
Yeah. Whatever you can ask that gets them that sparkle in their eye.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, those are great recommendations. Do you have any final recommendations for the listeners or many words of encouragement, maybe?
Yeah, the other day I shared my success formula, and it sounds very simple, right? Learn, do, share, repeat. But behind that, the thing that's really hard is really the repeat side, the continuation to know why you're doing it, to stay after it. And so, what I would suggest to anyone is don't give up and make sure that you know your why behind it. So, I am a huge planner fanatic. This year, I actually created my own planner. And the reason being is because for the past 10 years, I've been tracking my time in like half an hour increments. And I went back to when I started in data science, and it was so fun because I saw, like my goals, which were like get an internship and, study Python every day and had little checklists and whatnot. And it just made me so happy to like physically see that and see the progress that I'd made of like where I started and where I am today. And so, from that experience, I realized, I just reflected on like who I was back then and my mindset. I was like, oh my goodness, if like my younger self knew who I am today and where I am, I'd be so proud and so excited. And so sometimes just talk to your future self because it's probably going to give you a lot of encouragement to be like, if you just stay with it, amazing things will happen. And for me, like one of my keys to success is really just that consistency, the consistency of continuing to learn, continuing to do, continuing to share and uplift others. And the amount of compounding interest that you get from that over time will come back to you tenfold.
Yeah. I love that idea of like talking to your future and past self. So typically on Fridays, I'll set up like a to-do list, wrap things up. And if anything is open, I'll take notes on like what I need to start back up on Monday. And then I kind of take the weekend off for personal health, all the fun stuff. And then when I log back in on Monday, I could be like, my past Monica, thank you for setting me up for success.
Yes, 100%. I love to get all my Monday Trello boards, all those things organized and in place on Fridays so that when they come back, it's not like, wait, what am I and where am I? What am I doing?
Absolutely. Well, Sadie, thank you so much for coming on the show. If any of the audience members have any questions for you, where can they find and or follow you?
So I'm fairly active on all the social platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, X now, and TikTok. So you can find me pretty much anywhere.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. I do appreciate your time with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And as always, folks, happy learning.